our discussion will concern censorship for and against. My view is that I'm against censorship, and Chris's view is that he's for censorship. In terms of mass media, I think everybody is agreed that there are so many different forms of media that censorship probably doesn't apply anymore. When we look at such things as social media, mobile phone technology and citizen journalism, how can we establish censorship in that sort of environment? And I don't think we can. What's your view on that, Chris?
So I am for censorship. Well, I think you need to regulate the press, because otherwise the press and the multimedia have a, you could almost call it a moral right to be impartial and have an imbalanced view, and I don't think they can achieve that without some kind of like regulation. Otherwise you'll have someone's ideology all through.
No, I understand that, but if we're talking about citizen journalism and stuff that people put on Facebook and Twitter, how do we regulate it?
Well, essentially you have to have people monitoring the sites, and like for example hate speech is a good example of pro-censorship, where an individual can say something which is now considered a hate crime, and if it goes against the actual laws of the country they can remove it, and that is a form of censorship. So
in that case, yes it is.
So censorship is needed to promote all ideologies, because otherwise you'll just have, at the moment there's a big bias towards Islamophobia. Unless it's regulated and suppressed, it's just going to keep on going. So censorship is needed to decrease the levels of Islamophobia.
Well, there are all sorts of media comments on Islamophobia and such things as child safety, and I suspect that what we've actually got is a situation where we're all to some extent washed overboard with the stuff that we read in the media about such problems. But
so it needs to be censored then?
Yeah, very much so. No,
I thought you were anti.
No, in that situation I agree with you.
Right, okay. In which area do you not agree with censorship?
The problem I've got with it is with normal types of media is that they're controlled by so few people, and so, well, in the case of Britain, you've got Rupert Murdoch, you've got Richard Desmond, you've got Lord Rothermere, who effectively control all newspapers, and in the case of Murdoch, controlling TV, films, and virtually every sort of media, and essentially they dictate what goes in the newspapers, and that's a major problem. But I can't see how we can censor that, because ultimately they own the media, so they will decide what goes in the newspapers, television, journals, all the rest of it.
So freedom of the, so you're saying freedom of the press is a better idea because it promotes all the different ideologies? And
I think freedom of the press is a sound idea, but I don't think we can limit what the media barons want to tell us.
In which way? How?
Well, because they own the media, therefore they will tell us what they think we ought to hear.
What about as government regulations imposed, like press regulations?
I'm not convinced that they're terribly useful. After the phone hacking inquiry, there was all sorts of palaver about press freedom. I can't see that it's worked.
But then the only other problem you'd have with not if I am for censorship, you're against censorship, is in times of war, when there needs to be certain levels of censorship in place to maintain the security of the country. For example, the Chilcot inquiry that's coming out at the moment, how would you argue against censorship in that respect?
Well, that really all depends what it says. If it incriminates Tony Blair and the then cabinet, I'm all in favour of them being put on trial, but I'm fairly sure that it won't.
So would you have censorship for national security? Do you agree with that?
Well, we're talking to some extent about propaganda, aren't we?
Yeah.
In wartime, there is a need, I think, for censorship and all that comes from it, but in normal times, I don't think that there's an argument for it.
For censorship?
No.
And what's the main arguments for that?
As I went, going back to my original point, because the media is now spread over so many different sources, and even if we try to regulate what happens with journalists,
you don't think the editors regulate the journalists?
Well, they do to some extent.
Well, isn't that a form of censorship?
Well, yes, but the editors observe what the owners tell them. So it comes all the way down from the owners of the press as to what's in the newspapers, television.
Then the owners are imposing their own form of censorship, then surely.
So say again.
They're imposing their own form of censorship to their ideology by not reporting. For example, Murdoch wouldn't report on pro-Labour MPs.
Well, you wouldn't have thought so, but to use Murdoch as an example, he had a situation where prior to Brexit, the Times was in the Remain camp and the Sun was against, which makes no sense to me, but that was the way he chose to play two of his papers in the UK. So I don't think necessarily that the proprietors are ruling the roost as far as what goes into the papers are concerned.
And what about in society at large? What do you think about the consequences for censorship in society at large?
Well, no, as I've said before, I don't think it's possible, simply because the citizen journalist is effectively writing whatever he likes on social media.
Well, don't you think we have a responsibility to censor ourselves, thus avoiding hate speech and ideologies that aren't?
In an ideal world, yes, but I don't think it's possible. Because there are so many people now who want to appear on Facebook and Twitter with an argument that, well, they want to sound out on ordinary people, and then of course they get a deluge of comments, many of which they can't cope with.